Then God said, "Let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth." So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God he created them, male and female he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth." God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
My 20-month-old grandson, Whit, discovered his shadow this week. He was visiting here in Dallas, visiting, I say, due to his recent cruel exile to Oklahoma, don't you know? So I was looking all over the house for him, and I couldn't find him until I looked out the window and saw him out in the middle of the street, our street in the neighborhood. He was there with his mother and his grandmother, looking at them, giggling, while these two women were doing something that resembled a dance. I was a little embarrassed for them, so I went out to see what was going on. And, here they were, just like this. It turns out that when he discovered his shadow, he started trying to step on it. And they decided to join in. And then he stopped to watch them. And it was quite a scene. These two grown women in the middle of the street, completely unself-conscious about what they looked like and to whom, focused on this little boy and his joy. I love that, all of it. And then it got me thinking of all the toys we have bought, right? For the grandchildren when they come, of all the balls, of all the books we have accumulated. Watching the joy of this little boy and these giddy women celebrating Whit's discovery of his shadow. That is a simple gift of creation that is both free and priceless. And today, we begin a 4-week emphasis on generosity. You've been hearing about it. We're studying about it in Sunday school. Jacob Topper has written the curriculum for it. And so today we begin by pondering the generosity of creation. The first, foremost, and foundational gift of God to us all. In the first chapter of Genesis, we're told that God made the world, and then at the very climax of the making, God made humankind in God's own image and likeness. Now this turns out to square with our modern discoveries of science about the order of the emergence of the universe, and then of the earth, and then lastly of the highest complex forms of life as humankind comes into existence. That these ancient authors should have been so prescient to perceive the order of things is remarkable, I think, and maybe serves even to validate the theory of divine inspiration that Jews and Christians alike believe gave rise to these writings. Our faith, though, doesn't tell us why God made the world. Science can't tell us why the world has come to be. Philosophy can't say why there is something and not nothing. We simply believe that God intended what has come to be, and that it has come to be by the intention of God, by God's own will and desire for the world. God determined to make a world that is imbued with God's very own nature, a nature filled with joy that we are invited to share. When Genesis says that humans are made in the image and likeness of God, then really the first thing we should do is to consider the real thing, not the copy, not the image and likeness first, but the God in whose image we are made. And we should see that if our world is beautiful and plentiful and is a generative place to live in, then that must be the essential nature of the God who made it. Everyone has not always understood God in this way. This is a wonderful contribution to the world of our biblical religion. Prior to this view, people often believed that the gods were arbitrary and self-seeking, that they were actually quite stingy and only gave up favor when we curried it properly, when we manipulated the gods by our worship and our gifts and our sacrifices to get these gods' attention and to turn them to our favor. But it was not a given that their nature was generous. Our biblical view says that. Everything that is comes to us as an act of extraordinary grace. By grace you are saved, Paul says in Ephesians. And not just saved, but by grace you are given everything, including life itself. So when we rise in the morning to start a new day, it is as if God has been up all night waiting for us, making it ready, giving us a world that we can depend upon there to delight in. So instead of thinking about the world as a cold and cruel place that simply operates on laws of its own, where we are simply cogs in the wheel of nature, maybe we should be thinking about God as the gracious maker who through nature and its processes never ceases to continue to give and to give and to give. This is why I actually love the way G.K. Chesterton, the Christian writer and intellectual, put it. Because children, he said, have abounding vitality, because they are in spirit fierce and free, therefore, they want things repeated and unchanged. They always say, "Do it again." And the grown-up person does it again until he is nearly dead. For grown-up people are not strong enough to exult in monotony. But perhaps God is strong enough to exult in monotony. It is possible that God says every morning, "Do it again" to the sun, and every evening, "Do it again" to the moon. It may not be automatic necessity that makes all daisies alike. It may be that God makes every daisy separately, but has never got tired of making them. It may be that God has the eternal appetite of infancy, for we have sinned and grown old, and our Father is younger than we. How different would it be if we could conceive of things that way, if we could develop this attitude about God and the gifts of creation, that we would think about this as a never-ending realm of generosity? What if we could trust that this is really the way things are set up for us? How different would it be altogether in the way we live day to day? For one thing, I think it would transform our fear into faith. It would teach us not to think of the world as a limited realm of goods that we have to strive to capture at the expense of others. Too often it feels like we work and we vote as if there is only so much to go around and we have to make sure we get ours before someone else gets ours. But if God is always there providing a rich and abundant world for us to share in, and if we could trust God about that, how different would that make things for us all? One of my favorite stories comes from the Jewish tradition. There's an old rabbinic parable about a farmer who had 2 sons. As soon as they were old enough to walk, he took them to the fields and he taught them everything he knew about growing crops and raising animals. When he got too old to work, the 2 boys took over the chores of the farm, and then when he died, they decided that they enjoyed their partnership enough that they would continue the work together. So each brother contributed what he could, and during every harvest season, they would divide equally what they had produced together. Across the years, the elder brother never married, stayed an old bachelor. The younger brother did marry and had 8 wonderful children. So some years later, when they were having a wonderful harvest, the old bachelor brother thought to himself one night, "My brother has 10 mouths to feed, and I have only 1. He really needs more of this harvest than I do, but I know that he is much too fair to renegotiate. I know what I'll do. In the dead of night, when he is already asleep, I'll take some of what I have from my barn and slip it into his barn so that there'll be enough for him to feed his children." At the very same hour he was thinking along those lines, his younger brother was thinking to himself, "God has given me these wonderful children. My poor brother hasn't been so fortunate. He really needs more for his old age of this harvest than I do, but I know him, he's much too fair. He'll never renegotiate. I know what I'll do. In the dead of night, while he's asleep, I'll take some of this harvest from my barn and move it over to his barn so that he'll have enough." And so one night, when the moon was full, you know where this is going, right? The 2 brothers met between their barns on their errand of generosity. They fell into each other's arms. The old rabbi said that there wasn't a cloud in the sky that night, but a gentle rain began to fall. And it was God weeping for joy because 2 of his children had gotten the point. 2 of God's children had come to realize that generosity is the deepest characteristic of the holy. And because we are made in God's image, our being generous is the secret of joy for us too. Life is not fair. Thank God. It's not fair because it's rooted in grace. When we learn to think this way, we act according to our truest nature, a nature that reflects the image and likeness of God in us. And then it teaches us also to see each other not as competitors, but as collaborators in this remarkable world, as co-equal partners in everything we do. Did you notice in the text it says when God created humankind, God made them male and female in the image of God? That is to say, we share equally in the image of God. We have equal dignity and worth, so there can be no over and under of gender in our world. We live side by side. What's more, there is no hierarchy of class. God is not reflected more so in rich than in poor. in people of color than those who are white, or vice versa, more so in Westerners than Easterners, more so in Southerners than Northerners, more so in straight than in gay or transgender, more so than in those who are in authority and those who are powerless, more so than white collar than blue collar. Every single human being is precious to God, and we reflect that preciousness when we are generous toward one another, rather than trying to gain advantage over one another. Generosity is how we are made, and therefore we are at our best when we are living that out. Even the command to be fruitful and multiply is grounded in this truth. We don't make things from nothing. We make things from the fruitfulness of creation, that God has given us the opportunity to make more of creation. The Irish priest and poet Gerard Manley Hopkins talks about how the whole earth is charged with the grandeur of God. In one of my just most beloved lines of poetry, and one I've repeated many times to you, I have to do it again until you get it, right? He says, "There lives the dearest freshness deep down things." Yeah. I can't tell you how often I come back to that phrase when I'm worrying over the world. Creation is ever renewing itself by the work of a generous God. We talk all the time and rightly about our fears of climate change, our concern over the world with its hurricanes and typhoons and its forest fires and other natural disasters. And yet, in the wake of all of these, we see the power again and again of nature to renew itself. When a landscape has been completely devastated by a forest fire, for instance, and all that seems to remain are the charred remains of where grand trees and great canopies once were the order of that land. Yet, right then, the seeds of those trees have been broken open by the fire, and they begin to take root and to sprout and to bring forth new life, so that there is going to be another forest there one day. What once was a dense fire and now looks barren will again renew itself again and again. And this is true of natural disasters. And I tell you this day, though I hate to have to do this again, why can't we get one break from one week to the next? It is also true of moral disasters. 11 people dead in Pittsburgh. Another hate crime. Anti-Semite, white supremacists. Dear God, opening fire in a synagogue. The devastation of life, the horrible terror that it brings, and all of this, the loss, I tell you, because of the nature of creation and the God who is in it, it will not succeed. That this blood cries out to God, and new life will come from it. I tell you, darkness will come from light, and good from evil, because tragedy will never be the last word with God. And I can tell you that the very first person who contacted me this week as chair of Faith Forward Dallas to say we need to write a statement and deliver it to our Jewish friends was Imam Omar Suleiman, a Muslim leader in our community. You see, this is going to be the way of it. We're going to get through this, people. Our fears over losing give way over time to new opportunities of grace. Since Genesis 1 is actually a poem of sorts, I've used poetry more than once now in the sermon, to express the meaning of a generous creation, and I want to close with this one. From the farmer poet Wendell Berry, a Christian writer of immense imagination about the world God has made. Let it be a final gift to you this morning. In The Peace of Wild Things, he says this: when despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. Amen.